And again, I sent out an email earlier today changing the topic for this evening. And actually, what I would like to show you, I'm going to do my share screen. I want to get the right thing now. No, hold on. I need to do this first. Yeah, so this share screen. Yes, okay. So there is something, I presume you can see it okay. So there is a service called Torah.com. And so you can go there and sign up for emails. I don't even remember what stuff I signed up for, but I would say at least 2 or sometimes 3 emails from them each week. And one of them always has a series of essays on either the holiday of the week or the Torah portion of the week. And so, I got this today. Yep, there it is, Wednesday, April 17th. So I just wanted to show you the kind of material in there because it's very impressive. And it's also, I actually had to choose from which of the articles I wanted to discuss tonight. So, so um, I can't even remember now which one I did choose. But anyway, so the first one is God and not an angel. The Haggadah counters Jesus and the Arma Christi. I had never heard of the Arma Christi. It's Christian tradition. So that's one article. This is the one I think we're going to discuss tonight.
Yeah, that's one in
Yes,
the email.
yeah.
Yes.
So Passover becomes admitting people. Passover becomes about matzah when the Paschal lamb becomes associated with Jesus. Searching for the meaning of the Passover sacrifice. So I will just mention, and I say this a lot to different groups, probably this group, the word Pesach, which is of course the Hebrew name of the holiday, has 2 different meanings. It is a noun, and as a noun, it means the Paschal lamb, the sacrifice that's commanded in the Torah. And Pesach also is a verb which means to pass over. And of course, referring to the angel. Well, actually, the Torah doesn't say the angel of death. I know we all love to talk about the angel of death, but basically the plague of murdering or killing the firstborn. Jews are protected by putting blood on their doorposts. So here's an article about the Passover sacrifice. Here's an article which actually traces the historical origins of spilling the wine. And there's actually a couple of articles about this. So this is one, and here's a second one, the original reason for spilling the wine, protecting us from plagues, which I'd never heard of. Interesting article. And then this one I haven't even read yet, the right way to read the Haggadah. I did start reading it. So anyway, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. And so I recommend, you subscribe. So I am going to start with the article. So one question is, do you see the article, Torah.com, Passover becomes? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so it's a little easier to read like this because I printed out a PDF. This is actually, of course, what I sent to you. And it refers, as we'll see, actually presented in excruciating detail. One of the problems for me in this kind of mode is the articles in Torah.com tend to be very scholarly and like any good scholarly article, say in probably twice as many words as need to be said, and a lot of references and so on. But this is an interesting one, and it's another way of underlining the idea that our religion and our tradition first is very much influenced by the times in which we live. This is true going back to biblical times and Talmudic times and current times. There's a couple of places in the Haggadah where it's pretty clear that the authors of the Haggadah are reacting to Christianity. And and it's got to be very subtle because they didn't want the Christians to be burning all the Haggadot. So if it's that old song, it's the mamas and the papas. If you really want to play it, you got to lay it in between the lines. So so that's true here. So I'm going to read a little bit of the introduction, and then we'll get some volunteers. Passover becomes about matzah when the Paschal lamb becomes associated with Jesus. As late as the Second Temple period, Passover and Chag HaMatzot were viewed as two separate holidays. What was the final impetus to concretize the synthesis of these holidays into one? And I'll read just the introductory paragraph. Since the rabbinic period, and I'll remind you, the rabbinic period probably is from roughly, technically as early as 200 BCE and as late as 500 CE. Since the rabbinic period, the holiday of Passover has been celebrated as a 7-day holiday or 8-day in the diaspora. It begins on the eve of the 15th of Nisan and commemorates the miraculous exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. But as late as the Second Temple period, the following texts, such as Leviticus, Passover was comprised of two separate holidays: the holiday of Paschal Lamb, and celebrated at the end of the 14th day of Nisan, and the holiday of the unleavened bread, celebrated from the eve of the 15th day through the 21st. So, so now what we're going to see is a bunch of older texts which document the fact that these were observed in biblical times and temple times as two separate holidays. So would someone like to read the Passover papyrus?
I'll read.
Thank you, Lois.
Our earliest extra-biblical source regarding the observance of Passover is a letter found on the island of Elephantine, Egypt, dated to 419 BCE. It assumes the separateness of the holidays. A man called Hananiah instructs Jews to observe the Passover holiday on the 14th of Nisan and the festival of unleavened bread on the following 7 days. To my brothers,
I wouldn't worry so much about the names.
Right, Yadaniah and his colleagues, the Jewish garrison, your brother Hanina, whatever, may God, the gods, seek after the welfare of my brothers at all times. And now this year 5 of King Darius, it has been sent from the king to Arsames.
Yeah, let's just continue here.
Now you thus count 14 days in Nisan, and on the 14th at twilight observe the Passover. And from the 15th day until the 21st day of Nisan, observe the festival of unleavened bread. 7 days eat unleavened bread. Now be pure and take heed. Do not work on the 15th day, and on the 21st day of Nisan, do not drink any fermented drink, and do not eat anything of leaven, nor let it be seen in your houses from the 14th day of Nisan at sunset until the 21st day of Nisan at sunset, and bring into your chambers any leaven which you have in your houses, and seal them up during these days.
Okay,
just as my father did to my brothers.
Yeah, and you can skip that. Okay. So here we have, as early as 419 BCE, a non-biblical source talking about this as two separate holidays. And indeed, I can't remember if this article really gets into the Bible here. I'm not sure, because it's clear in the Bible, they talk about Chag Pesach actually, and Chag HaMatzot. And Chag Pesach is the 14th day of Nisan, and Chag HaMatzot is the 15th through the 21st. Let's read a little bit of the Book of Jubilees. So now we're in the 2nd century BCE. Lois, you can continue if you like.
2nd century BCE Book of Jubilees devotes an entire chapter to the holiday of Passover and repeatedly specifies that the holiday of Passover is a single day, which extends to the evening of the 15th of Nisan. And you remember this day, all of the days of your life, and observe it from year to year, all the days of your life, once per year on its day, according to all of its law. And you will not delay one day from its day or from one month to another month. Later in the same chapter, Jubilees acknowledges the Feast of Unleavened Bread as a separate holiday. And you, Moses, command the children of Israel so that they shall keep the ordinance of the Passover, just as it was commanded to you, so that you might relate to them its annual occurrence each year, both its period of days and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, so that they might eat unleavened bread for 7 days, so that they might observe its feast, and that they might bring its gift day by day during those 7 days to rejoice before the Lord upon the altar of your God.
Okay, one more paragraph.
According to Jubilees, sacrifices should be brought on each day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, but these sacrifices function as gifts to God, not as a commemoration of the Paschal lamb sacrificed by the Israelites on the cusp of their departure from Egypt. That historic event is memorialized on the 14th of Nisan on the Passover holiday.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of summarize the next few sections. I think we might get through this fairly quickly, and there's another article which I just want to expose you to. So we have someone named Philo, and I'm not exactly sure who Pseudo-Philo is, but there's a whole bunch of texts known as the pseudepigrapha. Pseudepigrapha is, I always say, it's the opposite of plagiarism. Plagiarism, you copy someone else's writing and you claim it's your own. In the pseudepigrapha, you actually write something and claim it belongs to someone else of a greater stature. So again, he's going to talk about Passover holiday just being 1 day. Josephus, who is a Jewish general who, when the Romans defeat the Israelites, the Jews, in the Great Revolt, we're talking now like 66 to 70 Common Era, he goes over to the Romans and he actually writes a history. And so he also is writing about a separation. And again, I'm just not going to go through all of the quotes. That's one of the things that this article does, is it just quotes it. But basically it's making the same point. And here is Philo. Philo is I think a first century Jewish author writing in Greek, and is also talking about the holidays being separate. So we can get some interesting material now on the question of what changed. And Lois, if you want to continue, you can do that.
I was just wondering, what do we know why they were separate in the first place?
Well, that's what's in the Torah. So it looks like what the Torah is saying is there's two things going on. On the eve commemorating, the God going through and killing the firstborn, we're supposed to go in our homes and sacrifice a Paschal lamb and smear the blood on the doorposts and so on. And then it just goes on. I'm actually a little surprised they don't just quote the Torah here. And then it also will go on to say, I mean, maybe we can take a look at that as we get to the end of this. And then actually, I'm going to give Cheryl, I'm going to give you a task. If you can maybe take a look at, where is
What?
it? Leviticus 23, 5-8. Can you just bring that up on Safari? I will make you a co-host, and you
Yeah.
can share. You can
Yeah.
share. Okay.
Leviticus
Okay.
23. Okay.
Leviticus 23, 5-8. And yeah, actually, why don't we take a look at that right now? So I'm gonna stop sharing. Are you familiar with how to share and stuff on Cheryl?
First I'm calling up Leviticus.
Yeah, on Safari.
Right. Yeah, I'm calling it up on Safari. Yeah. Okay, 23, 5-8. All right, got it. Okay,
Actually, I probably should
more.
post them.
All right. Okay. Share screen. Okay. Do you see
Okay.
it?
Yes. So, yeah, so I'm gonna, so in verse 5, it says, on the first, you can read it, on the first day of the month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, there shall be a Passover offering to Adonai. So, Pesach Adonai. It just says it's a Pesach to Adonai, but it's understood as a Passover offering. So that's on the 14th day. And then it goes on to say, on the 15th day of the month, it's Adonai's feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread for 7 days. So yeah, so here it's Chag HaMatzot Adonai. It's the Chag, actually, which means a pilgrimage festival of Matza, and Sheva Yamim Matzot Tochelu. You will eat. So it's and then it says on the first day you celebrate a sacred occasion, and I think here they're really just talking about the matzah, Chag HaMatzot, because they haven't given us more directions about what to do and how to offer the Pesach. So I think I'm going to stop your sharing. So it's basically, whoops, it's oh, I don't know what I have now. Hang on one second. Okay. So basically it's in the Torah that way, and we basically just miss it as being two separate holidays. And of course now we don't sacrifice a Paschal lamb, I think, as you know. And in fact, you may not know this, but you're not supposed to serve any roasted meat on Passover. You're supposed to serve a lovely brisket, which of course is not roasted, or or a boiled chicken or something, but you're not supposed to actually have a roast for fear that you might misinterpret the roast as being a roasted Paschal offering. Of course, we remember the Paschal offering by having a shank bone on the Seder plate. And in fact, if you look in the Mishnah about the 4 questions, one of the questions changed from the Mishnah to our current Haggadah. And one of the questions is about on all of the nights we eat, different kinds of meat or meat prepared differently, roast meat and I guess boiled meat. On this night, we only eat boiled meat. So that's again, we're getting away from this idea of the Paschal offering. And of course, the key question here is what changed? And so, Lois, if you want to continue reading, you can do that.
Okay. You want to put the text up?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that would help. I can see it just
I
fine.
can make stuff up because I don't really understand that they were two separate holidays. You were
Yeah,
just,
so that's why.
I mean, you were focused on one thing, and then the very, at sunset, you started focusing on the other. It doesn't sound like
yes. No, it doesn't sound like two separate holidays. And one of the, I mean, this is a comment, I guess, on my nature as much as anything
it's
else.
like
I let me finish, Stephen. I love finding deeper insights into Jewish practice, and I take special delight in finding deeper and interesting insights into things we thought we knew exactly what we were doing. Stephen, yeah.
Well, it's in terms of holidays that run one right into another. It's like Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, Simchas Torah, right? Except that there it's even more extreme because depending on where you are in the world, things may or may not be actually on the same day. So Passover now is when the festival of Matzot was, and the day that had been the sacrifice, that has become the fast for the newborns, right?
Yeah. So, but I mean, that's in terms of the date, that's true. A rabbinic tradition developed, which some of you may not be familiar with, that the firstborn, and it probably only applies to males because of just historical things, but the firstborn son in every house is supposed to fast, and it's a daytime fast from sunrise to the Seder on the day before Passover. And that's, in commemoration of the fact that firstborns were killed. And so again, in most of my worlds, that we don't have that fast. There's a bunch of other sort of minor fasts that you may never have observed. There's a fast of Esther. There is a fast of the Tzom Gedalia, the fast of Gedalia. That's the most obscure thing I can think of in Jewish tradition. But let's get to back to the subject of what changed.
What changed? These sources indicate that throughout the Second Temple period, Passover and Chag HaMatzot were celebrated by most Jews as two separate holidays. By the rabbinic period, I don't know how they get away with that idea, but
I don't know
by
what
the
to,
rabbinic,
hold on a second. Which
because
idea?
if they're right up against each other, as Stephen was saying about other holidays later in the year, they're not separate.
Okay. Oh, well, no, it's a very important question. So Chag Pesach, what are you supposed to do on Chag Pesach? You get yourself a Paschal lamb and you sacrifice it. And up until, like the 600-700s BCE, Israelites apparently did this in their homes. It was a home-based holiday.
And then ate it, probably.
Yes. And there's rules about not leaving
With
any of
the
it over to
matzah.
morning.
With
No.
the
This is the 14th day. They're not talking about matzah at all. They're just sacrificing an animal. It's not the evening of the 14th day, because the evening of the 14th day is the 15th day. So on the 14th day, you sacrifice this animal. And then in Second Temple, starting actually pretty early with Deuteronomy, you go to Jerusalem to do the sacrifice. And then that's a holiday. And then the next day, beginning at sunset, of course, you have a different holiday, which is a holiday in which you're commanded to eat matzah. And they're different holidays. I'll make a reference to it with which you may or may not be familiar. In Israel, there are two holidays separated by a sunset, and one is Yom HaZikaron, which is Israeli Memorial Day, which is a genuinely sad day because every family in Israel has lost people in wars in Israel. And then at sunset is Yom HaAtzmaut, which is Independence Day, which is a crazy joyous day. And, I've been in Israel actually a couple of times on that day, and it's astounding because you have a very sad day. All the radio stations are playing sort of mournful music. And then at sunset, people start going crazy. It's 4th of July. So I agree with you that one moves right into another, but in biblical times, they were two separate holidays. Erwin.
Yeah, in Montreal, I lived next door to a Greek Orthodox family. And Easter in their backyard, I'm not joking, they sacrificed the lamb and they put it up and they roasted the lamb.
Yeah.
So which one was first, the Greek Orthodox or the Jewish holiday?
Oh no,
Pesach.
I mean Judaism. The Jewish holiday is in the Torah, which clearly is hundreds of years before Christianity. But it is interesting, and really we're going to focus on this, that Jesus becomes the Paschal Lamb, which they're going to speculate as the main reason why the Jews got away from observing this holiday as one being associated with the Paschal Lamb. In fact, in Romance languages, such as in Spanish, the name for Easter is Pascua, which means Paschal, which means Passover, which I find interesting. Okay, Lois, you can continue.
By the rabbinic period, however, they appear to be one and the same. Already 8 centuries ago, Rav Isaiah of Trani the Elder observed that although the holidays are two, the rabbis treat them as one. commenting on the opening Mishnah of the 10th chapter of Pesachim, a tractate that deals with the Pesach sacrifice as well as the issues of Chametz and Matza. In his Talmudic Nabalei Tosafot Rid observes, even
And
though
his
the
nickname is Rid, just like, great rabbis have nicknames.
even though the 14th of Nisan is called Pesach, as it is written, Leviticus 23:5, on the 14th day of the month, this month is a Pesach for the Lord. The Tana of the Mishnah does not avoid referring to the entire holiday of Matzot as Pesach. What happened during the 2nd century CE that brought about this change? In all likelihood, multiple factors contributed to the definitive fusion of these holidays.
So I just want to say a word about timing again. So now we're talking about the Mishnah in Tractate Pesachim. The Mishnah is written down in the year 200 of the Common Era. So it's already a time when there is what is originally a Jewish movement, which becomes Christianity and becomes a Gentile movement. Okay, so let's continue.
First, there is, in fact, biblical precedent that at least some Jews viewed these holidays as one combined holiday. Deuteronomy 16:1-8 links these holidays in a way that seems to bind them together. Likewise, Ezekiel 45:21-23 does not seem to distinguish between the two holidays. However, the existence of post-biblical sources that take the separation of these holidays for granted indicates that, for many Jews, these holidays were still separated from one another. It is possible that the fusion of these two holidays was concretized in the 2nd century. By this time, Jesus' association with the Paschal Lamb, particularly as it is presented in the Gospel of John, was well known. This association may have resulted in a gradual de-emphasis on the holiday of the Paschal Lamb in the rabbinic community, which culminated in the final synthesis of the holiday of the Paschal Lamb and the Feast of Unleavened Bread into a single holiday. The Last Supper. According to the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus' Last Supper was on the evening of the 14th of Nisan. According to these sources, Jesus was crucified on the following day, the 15th of Nisan. The timeline is different than the one found in the latter Gospel of John, written sometime towards the end of the 1st century. In John's version, Jesus is crucified on the 14th day of Nisan, and his Last Supper occurred on the night before, on the 13th of Nisan. By moving Jesus' crucifixion back one day, John is turning Jesus not only into a sacrifice, but into the sacrifice. The Passover lamb has now been replaced by Jesus himself. Considering the immense popularity and centrality of Passover in Second Temple times and in Judaism as a whole, this move would place Jesus' imagery in the spotlight of a core Jewish practice. The rabbinic community reacted against this replacement by making the Feast of Unleavened Bread more central than the Paschal Lamb, and indeed called the entire new festival Passover, thereby blurring the distinction between the 7-day festival and the day of the Paschal offering.
Okay, and that's actually the end of the article. We're gonna take a look at another article, but Stephen, you have your hand up.
Okay, well, 2 questions. One is, we know what day the crucifixion was, so can we just check to see which day of Nisan fell on that day of the week?
How do you know which day the crucifixion was?
I'm sorry, we know the crucifixion, the Christian tradition, regardless of which date you go with, is that the crucifixion was a Friday, the resurrection a Sunday. So can we just check which day of Nisan fell on a Friday?
Yeah, so the question is whether that is historical. And I would say the scholars that I deal with, let me put it this way. One major argument that Jesus was not crucified by the Jews, other than the fact that crucifixion was not a Jewish form of capital punishment and torture, is Jews would never crucify anyone, would never put anyone to death on a holiday. So, so that's the simple answer. He may have been put to death on Passover, and there's speculation, which is mentioned here, and there's a lot of scholarly articles, which address the speculation that the Last Supper was a Passover Seder. It sounds like a Passover Seder because Jesus is talking about bread and wine, and people are gathering to eat. But I would say the preponderance of scholarly opinion is that it probably was not a Passover Seder.
In the painting of the Last Supper, there are rolls which are leavened bread visible. So was the artist taking the position that it was not Passover, or is he just ignorant?
I mean, I think the one you're thinking of is Da Vinci.
Yeah.
And I don't know. My guess is he was not making a particular representation of the bread as matzah. It's funny, in the synagogue where I was a rabbi in Camarillo, in the hallway, there is a picture of a nicely set table with a glass of wine and a loaf of bread. And I never once had any of the Jews object to that picture. Although, because, what could be more Shabbos than a loaf of bread and a cup of wine, right? So people walking in would feel very comfortable. But of course, it was a representation of Jesus' body and blood at the Last Supper. Yeah, my guess is Da Vinci wasn't trying to draw the distinction or make a theological.
I thought you were the near me rabbi back when they were in the other building in the industrial park before they moved to the church.
Both. We moved while I was the rabbi. Bryce.
I thought that Da Vinci painted the Last Supper under the direction of the Catholic Church. So he certainly wasn't going to try to be historically accurate and sneak Jewish thematic stuff in.
Yeah, and I don't know, historically or even today, whether the Catholic Church speculates officially that the Last Supper was a Passover Seder. As I say, on one level, it doesn't make any sense at all, because if you speculate that the Jews in the Sanhedrin had anything to do with Jesus' death, they would definitely not put Jesus to death on a Friday afternoon. Okay, I'm going to jump to a different article. Can you see this? I, God, and not an angel. And not an angel. Yes. Yes. Okay, good. Yeah. So I'll kind of go through this, and maybe we won't even. I'm not going to dwell on the Arma Christi. There's a lot of material in there. But one of the interesting things, well, you'll see the interesting thing here. The Haggadah's insistence that God, without an intermediary, saved the Israelites from Egypt is a veiled retort to the Christian belief that God relied on Jesus as an agent of redemption. However, the Midrash replaces the Arma Christi tradition of recounting the weapons Jesus used to save humanity during the crucifixion with its own distinctively Jewish arsenal of redemption: pestilence, a sword, the Shekhinah, the staff, and the blood. And Professor Stephen Weitzman. Okay, so at its core, the Passover Haggadah is a midrashic commentary on a few verses in Deuteronomy, a summary version of the Exodus story declared when bringing the first fruits, as specified in Deuteronomy 26:5-8. The last verse of the passage reads, "And Adonai brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great terrors and with signs and wonders." So this is actually a great example of midrash, and those of you that study Talmud will recognize this technique, because in essence, what the Haggadah is going to do is take every phrase in that passage of Deuteronomy and dig into it, and you'll recognize the language if you have familiarity with a somewhat traditional Haggadah. The Lord brought us out of Egypt, not by an angel, not by a seraph, not by a messenger, but by the Holy One, blessed be he, through his own glory and his own power. And I've never seen this level of description, but I often, when I'm leading a Seder, comment here that this is, again, a very subtle way of distinguishing Jews and Judaism from Christianity. Because, of course, in Christianity, the redemption for Christians is through Jesus, and even a threefold, well, through Jesus is the Redeemer. And so the Haggadah is going out of its way of saying, no, it's actually God, the Holy One, blessed be he, not by an angel. A seraph is another angelic kind of flaming creature, not by a messenger, but by the Holy One. The Haggadah then supports its interpretation by citing God's first-person prediction of the final plague. As it says in Exodus 12:12, I will pass through Egypt on this night. I will strike down the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both humans and animals, and against all the gods of Egypt I will render judgment. I am the Lord. And then the Haggadah is going to take apart every verse there. I will pass through the night, through Egypt on this night. This means I and not an angel. I will strike down the firstborn land of Egypt. This means I and not a seraph. Against all the gods of Egypt I will render judgment. This means I and not a messenger. I am the Lord, Ani Adonai, I and no one else. And by the way, another commentary I often get into about Passover is all of the plagues are really, in some sense, gods of Egypt. So one of them, the sort of the mega themes that's going on in the story of the Exodus in the Bible is the battle of God, capital G, versus the gods, namely the gods of Egypt. So God is going to be put up against all the other gods. Some scholars view this interpretation as a response to the Gnostic belief that a divine logos, a personified wisdom, helped God to redeem the Israelites. However, it is more likely a response to Christianity and its claim that God redeemed humanity through the Messianic Jesus. No, this Midrash retorts, God did not rely on an intermediary. Israel's redemption was far greater than the redemption conceived by the Christians because God intervened directly to save his people. The Midrash continues. Here we might expect the Haggadah to continue directly with the recitation of the biblical plagues. Instead, it lists 5 items. With a mighty hand, this is pestilence. With an outstretched arm, this is the sword. And with great terror, this is the revelation of the Shekhinah. And with signs, this is the staff. And with wonders, this is the blood. Which is actually diverting, as the commentary will say, from the Torah account. I mean, there's no mention in the Torah of a sword, of God having a sword. The pestilence is drawn from the Exodus story of the plagues and refers to the cattle disease of the 5th plague, while the staff refers to the staff of Moses used to work some of the plagues. There is no mention in Exodus, however, of God using a sword to strike the Egyptians or revealing the Shekhinah. Why does the Haggadah include this? Just as the first part of the Haggadah's Midrash counters the Christian understanding of redemption, God did not need an assistant like Jesus to save his people, and no one else delivered them. So the second part extends the anti-Christian polemic, countering a tradition known as Arma Christi, the weapons of Christ, with its own catalog of the powers that God used to deliver Israel from slavery and death. So now there's going to be a lot of material, which I'm not going to, I'll read just the introduction. In the Arma Christi tradition, the implements that were used against Jesus during the crucifixion, such as the cross itself, the crown of thorns, the lance used to pierce Jesus' body, and the nails driven into his hands and feet, have paradoxically been transformed into the weapons by which Jesus achieve victory over his enemies on humanity's behalf. And now there's going to be just a tremendous amount of material about this Arma Christi, which I'm, it's just more detailed than I'm terribly interested in. And then it talks about how maybe in response to this, the Haggadah is going to quote other implements that God used, namely the hand, the sword, the Shekhinah. It's interesting to mention Shekhinah in biblical Hebrew. Shekhinah simply refers to the presence of God in the world. Because it's a feminine word, the mystics are going to have a lot of fun with this and make Shekhinah almost like a bride of God and a female aspect of God. But in older texts, it's simply the presence of God. I'm trying to see if there's, well, blood is also, of course, an important reference both in the Passover story when the Israelites slaughter a lamb. The lamb was worshipped by the Egyptians. So think about the public display that happened with the slaughtering of the lamb. You slaughter a god of Egypt, and then every Jew is going to identify his home, his or her home, by having blood on the doorpost. So it's a public demonstration of, your faith in God and God's promise, as opposed to worrying about what the Egyptians are going to do. And of course, this idea of blood as a mechanism for redemption is very much picked up by Christianity. Try to see. Yeah, Cheryl has some interesting information about the Gospels. So that's really. Let me read down here. Yeah, there's one or two more paragraphs. Judaism's relationship with Christianity. The Midrash would thus represent another example of the Haggadah's two-sided relationship to Christianity, combining anti-Christian polemic with the emulation of Christianity, showing how the Midrashic preamble to the 10 plagues was both influenced by and reacting to a Christian concept of redemption as spiritual warfare. The author of the Midrash in the Haggadah wanted to insist that God's redemption of Israel was unique, but in commemorating that redemption as a catalog of divine powers, he reveals himself to be entangled in a spiritual arms race with Christians that involve both competition and imitation. And again, I'm going to stop sharing. We can chat a bit. For me, this is fascinating because it shows, it isn't only in modern times that we are living in a world heavily influenced by Christianity. Think about the significance of Hanukkah in Christian lands. So this goes on. Another element of this, which is really interesting, I have a book behind me. I think it's called. I think it's like there's a book about anti-Christianity in the Talmud, and a lot of it doesn't survive. In the copies of the Talmud that we have today, you don't find a lot of these anti-Christian polemics. And one of the reason, my understanding is correct, the reason we're even aware of them is some of the commentaries on these old Talmudic passages survived. So we don't have the passages themselves, but we can recreate them by looking at commentaries that survive. And the understanding is that, I don't know when, I think the disputations in Barcelona, I think Christianity became aware systematically of the Talmud in like 7th, 8th, 9th century, Common Era, clearly. Before then, I think Christianity was just confused about Judaism. Judaism, if you try to understand Judaism as Christianity would probably, simply by reading the Hebrew Bible, it would be very puzzling, because it's clear that the Jews of that time weren't practicing the Judaism of the Hebrew Bible. So I think Christianity was really probably not paying all that much attention to Jews and Judaism. In some of the disputations, the Christian world or the theologians became aware of the Talmud, and I don't remember exactly when this happened, but it's around 1,000 years ago, give or take a few hundred years. There were mass burnings of Talmuds in Europe, and it was difficult for Talmuds to survive. Now remember, in this time, this is before Gutenberg, so if you had a copy of anything, a book, a scroll, or anything, it meant it was hand copied. So one of the speculations is that as copyists kept copying the Talmud
Printing.
in Christian times, they would eliminate the anti-Christian polemics, about, I mean, the obvious thing about whether Jesus was an illegitimate child, because supposedly, his mother was a virgin. So there's speculation about a Roman soldier who's even named in some of these passages who impregnated Mary, and developing this story. So the copyists had to eliminate that because for fear that those sections would be burned. So it's very interesting to see the interplay of these traditions. Stephen and then Bryce.
Gutenberg didn't invent the printing press. Gutenberg invented movable type. There were printing presses before, but you had to carve whatever it was you wanted to print. You couldn't just put together
like a woodcut, right, or something.
That's
I don't
correct.
know,
Yes.
but it was having the separate things of each letter, so you could just arrange them. Was what Gutenberg invented.
Oh, that yeah.
Yes, movable type.
Yeah, that's something I ought to be more sensitive to when I talk about this. But what it meant was, I mean, if you understand how long and complicated and involved the Talmud is, to have that many plates would be an enormous undertaking. Bryce.
Yeah, and by the way, that whole Roman soldier is a father of
Jesus.
Of Jesus. Actually, that turns up in the life of Brian, because Brian, who is the alternative Christ, his father claims his father was a Roman soldier.
Okay. I don't know if they got that from some of these histories or not, but it definitely turns up. And some of the stuff, and I haven't read that book in probably 25 years. Some of the stuff written about Jesus is really nasty in those texts.
Says nice things about you.
I don't know what you mean by that.
It's a joke. It's a joke.
Okay. So any other thoughts about Passover, and I hope you all have a place to celebrate your holidays. Jerry, it looks like you're back in California. Welcome home. That's good. So Lois, I don't know if you're waving or you want to say something.
Yeah, no, I'm preparing for Monday night, which is at my kids', and we have a lot of people, most of whom are not Jewish. I'm struggling with how to deal with 10/7 hostages and the Iranian attack. And I'm just wondering how people are thinking about this and whether they're going to talk about empty places at the Seder how are you approaching it?
Yeah, I'm caring for Sonia, so I'm not leading a Seder this year. I would just say that anti-Semitism and attempts to wipe out the people Israel are not new. And we are remembering one from 3,200 years ago. And the symbolism of removing a drop of wine, although, in this email, there's a lot of discussion of different sources of that, but the absolute common source is we don't rejoice at the death of our enemies. So, I'll just repeat it in case you're not familiar with it, but the commentary is that while you recite the plagues, you remove a little bit of wine from your cup. And in my family, it was always the pinky. And actually, in one of those articles, they talk about doing it with the pinky, and it makes me feel better. Or there's another, tradition of just spilling out a little bit of wine with a mention of each plague. And this is inspired by a midrash, which is while the sea is crashing in and the Egyptians are drowning, the angels are singing songs of celebration to God, and God admonishes them and says, you shouldn't be rejoicing because the Egyptians are my children also. So I would say one of the things to comment on, which is particularly worth commenting on, is that while we, rejoice in the survival of Israel, we don't rejoice in the death of Israel's enemies, and particularly innocents. And without getting into a discussion of Gaza and who's at fault and everything else, there is no question that innocent people are dying. Innocent Gazans, Arab Muslims are dying, and it's not an occasion for rejoicing. And it is stimulating, I'm sure, as we are all aware, an enormous outbreak of anti-Semitism around the world, including in this country, and especially on college campuses. And there was a hearing today in the Congress on that subject. So I would say that would certainly be my approach. If you go online and just search for Passover readings, recognizing the crisis in Gaza and the Middle East, you will find posts by rabbis and
Right.
poems and beautiful insights. And
What happened today in Congress?
There was a hearing. I think the president of Columbia University, I think it's Columbia,
Columbia.
was testifying, and I haven't heard of any outrage. So whatever.
Well, she was much better. She learned from her colleagues.
Yeah, I mean that's an important thing. If you can't learn from experience of your colleagues, you probably shouldn't be president of a major university. But it's bad, and it's things aren't getting better now. I mean, I'm always hopeful, and the episode with Iran attacking Israel, and Israel almost being perfect in protecting itself from this massive attack. I mean, there was a speculation I saw today about, suppose Israel hadn't protected itself, there probably would have been thousands or tens of thousands
Correct.
of innocents killed, and probably Jews and Muslims. I think the one severe injury was to a Muslim.
She's Druze. She's
guy.
Druze.
Sorry?
She's Druze.
Druze Muslim. Yeah, okay. They're still Muslims. So
Right.
and the other thing, that is somewhat hopeful for me, who is always in search of naive, hopeful points, is that a lot of the nations surrounding Israel, even and especially the Arab nations, either actively or passively participated in Israel defending itself. And I think even Jordan shot down some,
Yeah,
weapons
the
in
interesting
its
thing
airspace.
about Jordan is they've tried to keep it a secret to their own people.
Yes, because of.
The
Well, what they're
virulent
trying to do is
Hold on a second. Finish, Lois.
I said just because of the virulent anti-Semitism, anti-Israelism in Jordan, which is something like 60% Palestinian now. But I think what struck me is not if Israel couldn't protect from all, but what if one got through? It could have killed 1,000 people at once.
Yeah, and I don't know, they said 99% effective. And if there were 300 missiles fired or 300
Right.
vehicles fired, that would suggest.
Right. And
3.
they could have destroyed Al-Aqsa in their brilliance.
Yeah, there was stuff going on over the. Hold on a second, Bryce. Jerry.
Yes, I got to speak 3 days before the occurrence. My brother's brother-in-law, Robert Berger, reports from Jerusalem, and he told us this was going to happen. And, of course, we saw it come to truth, and we happened to call his twin daughters the next day to check up on them, and they were going to the beach, almost as if nothing had happened.
You
But
talking about the day after the
yeah,
attack?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
It just shocked us.
Yeah.
But, either they have tremendous hope and faith, or it's happened so many times that they're numb and they want to just enjoy life as they can. I have no idea.
I know that Israelis place a lot of confidence in the warnings that are given. So there was a period of time I remember, watching the news, I think it was Saturday night, when there were warnings, and late Saturday night Israel time. Now I'm a little confused about times. Basically they said, you don't need to continue to shelter. So evidently, I mean, everybody expected Iran to do something, because the Iranian consulate was attacked in Syria, so they had to do something. And I think there was some relief that they didn't fire 10,000 missiles, because Hezbollah has hundreds, if not thousands, of missiles. And at some point in time, there's only a limited number of Iron Dome things that can intercept.
Yeah.
Okay, I need to say something here.
Go ahead.
Okay, because first of all, Iran coordinated through the Swiss embassy with the United States and Israel, telling everybody that the attack was going to occur and where the missiles were going to come from, because they did not want any widening of the conflict. They didn't want a wider war. They wanted to nip this in the bud, and they made a statement that once this was done, they were finished with the matter, considered it done, it was completely finished. They had to respond because their soil was attacked. Okay, so they had to respond diplomatically, and they had to do something. It was a show. It wasn't a real attack.
Right. It was
Okay?
face saving, and now
A face-saving thing, exactly. They want to be done. And now Netanyahu is talking about retaliating.
right.
Okay?
So, right.
And Iran says, if, we considered this done. If you retaliate on this, we are going to destroy you. And what Biden said to Netanyahu is, if you keep this up, you're on your own.
Yeah, I mean, Biden did say we're not going to participate in any attacks on Iran. Jane.
Bryce, I think it's only one interpretation of what really
I understand that. That's
and
an
what
interpretation,
their
but
goals
everybody
are.
has their own interpretation that serves
Correct.
their own
Correct.
emotional needs. And if you want to believe that Israel is beleaguered under attack from everybody, and Israel, Israel is complicit in this in some ways. And so it isn't a matter of it's all one-sided. If you want to just be one-sided about it, it isn't that way. That's all I can say.
Okay, Jane, you had your hand up.
Okay, I just want to say that, you're on the West Coast, on the East Coast, Cardinal O'Connor from New York, the big, St. Patrick's Cathedral and everything. He was in Israel when this attack
Oh, that's interesting.
hit, and he was led to a bunker, and he was safe. And when he came out, I mean, he's not used to this stuff. He absolutely, like Lois said, he was absolutely blown away that people just went on, okay, now that's over. Now we'll continue with our life. And I can understand that. Look, stop and think. When Georgia gets snow, it's like they're crazy. They don't know what to do. They're not used to it. But if you're in Buffalo It's no big deal.
Yeah,
Buffalo
that's
gets a ton of snow and they just go on their way.
well. I'll make a comment. I don't know if I've mentioned it to this group, but when I was a rabbinic student, we spend our summers doing various things, and one of the options is participating in an archaeological dig. And I was in northern Israel at Tel Dan, if you've heard of that, and we were digging, and there for 2 or 3 days, and basically it's hot. It's the summer. Israel's pretty hot, so you start at like 6 in the morning, and you do whatever project you're working on till about 2 in the afternoon, and then you go back to, I think we were on a kibbutz or something, and you do a bunch of things sort of in the shade. You're washing pottery, you're sorting things, and then we had lectures, and then along comes trucks driving through the area saying something in Hebrew. And my Hebrew wasn't really very good at that point. It's probably still not very good. And particularly the Hebrew for, get your butt to a shelter now. That was actually not part of the biblical Hebrew that I had studied. And we were under attack from Lebanon with Katyusha rockets. And so just like the Cardinal, I spent the night in a shelter. I suspect my accommodations weren't exactly as good as his, because we were about 30 people in a very small shelter with one non-functioning toilet. So it was far from pleasant. And I must admit, in the morning, I got up and I left the shelter to meet my personal needs and went back, because we didn't hear anything exploding. I mean, and of course the dig was canceled, but it does affect your mindset just to know that there are people out there trying to kill me for the only reason because I'm Jewish. And the Israelis are used to this, and when I've spent a lot of time in Israel, and you hear explosions, and quite often they're sonic booms, because the jets are flying overhead and they're not going slow, and quite often they're supersonic. And what the tour guides always told me is, when you hear one of these things, just look at an Israeli. If they're running for shelter, then you run too. If not, it's a sonic boom. Okay, I can see, Jerry, you still have your hand up, and Stephen, you still have your hand up. I don't know if
No, I wanted to say one
ahead.
other thing. It reminded of me of being in New Jersey, well, actually in New York City, when the earthquake hit, and
Oh.
everybody was going crazy. I'm going, what's
Yeah, that's a good example. Yeah.
I mean, it was only 4.3, and they
Right.
were like going nuts, and the management's knocking on everyone's doors, and I'm going, this was nothing.
Well,
But
it's the same thing with a heavy rain in Southern California,
yeah,
or like the
yep,
occasional snow we get. It's exactly the same.
right.
Stephen, I don't know if you have your hand up because you want to
Okay.
say. Yeah.
I,
go ahead.
I've actually had a few things come up since I put it up. I'll sort of work backwards. To whoever said something about what Biden had said the U.S. will or won't do, that's really what the U.S. will or won't do until between now and January 20th. If Biden loses the election, all bets are off. Going back to earlier, we were talking, you asked people the question about Passover. The two things I never understood about Passover, there's some things we're taught we do it this way because we're free and we can because we're not slaves anymore. And there are other things we do them this way and we do them some way and we're taught we do it this way because this is what we were forced to do, what we had to do when we were slaves.
Yes.
But I've never gotten a clear explanation for how it is they decide which things to have us do the way we had to do them when we were slaves, and which things to do the way we can do them now that we're not slaves.
Okay, are you ready?
Yeah.
So the story of Passover is a story of journey from servitude and idolatry to freedom and worship of God. And the whole metaphor and theater of a Passover Seder is taking you through that journey. And the one very clear example is Matza. In the beginning of the Seder, the leader holds up the matzah, and then in Aramaic, which I'm sure everybody understands, he says, halach ma'anya, This
Yeah.
is the bread of affliction. So matzah starts out not as the bread of freedom. It's going to become the bread of freedom at the end of the Seder, or toward the end, and the bread of redemption, the three matzahs and so on. But it begins with the bread of affliction. So the Seder is reenacting the journey from affliction and servitude to freedom and worship of the one God. And there's a lot of symbolism that's taking you through that journey. And we build it in with play acting, as one of my teachers would say. In order to be a kosher Jew, you have to be a bit of a ham. So you have to reenact the Seder, and you have to imagine that you yourself were redeemed from Egypt. It's not just we're commemorating, the Star Spangled Banner commemorates a battle somewhere. We are actually trying to feel like how it felt to be a slave. So we have bitter herbs, we have salt water for the tears, and so on, and matzah as a poor bread. And the explanation that I've seen is that matzah would have been the kind of bread that slaves ate. They didn't have a lot of time to let it rise in an oven. It would be made quickly, and it was just calories that they would need.
But the exception is that we recline because we're free and we can.
Yes.
And
Well,
why did they pick that one to be the one thing as opposed to the food or any number of other things?
Yeah, because it's symbolic of a Roman symposium. The Seder itself is modeled on a Roman symposium, which were Roman meals designed to discuss a subject. And so, the understanding is now we're having the Seder where we're free. So we are going to recline because we don't have to be slaves to others, and we don't have to rush.
What my
to
original
So is it
question
true
was,
that gefilte is the fish of affliction?
I would say so. Stephen, what were you going to say?
My original question though was, why was it that they chose the way we sit to be the thing that we do the way that we can because we're free, and the things and everything else to be done the way we had to do it when we were slaves? They could have just as easily have said, we're going to eat the foods that we can eat because we're free people, and not eat the things that we had to eat when we were slaves.
No, but
and we're going to sit upright to commemorate how people had to sit when they were slaves.
But well, how did you sit when you were slaves? You didn't sit down to eat. You ate on the run.
Okay, they could have fine. They could have us eat standing up. That's
so I would just say is over the centuries, in the creation of the Haggadah, this is the way they set it up, and some things like the way you sit were copied from Roman practice, and others, is basically a midrash, a commentary on the Torah passages, and of course now, I would say many of us are at Seders which vary widely from the traditional practice. It's the old story with the orange on the Seder plate as symbolizing change. So, and I want to call your attention, if you haven't seen it, Cheryl has posted a lot of things, resources. I'm trying to see if I can just copy them.
I sent you the email. It came
great.
from my rabbi today,
Okay.
of people asking the question that Lois posed of what do you do this year at the Seder?
Okay, well,
And
I'll
apparently
send that on.
there are resources that CCAR and some of the local rabbis have
Yeah,
put
thank you.
together.
Thank you. I will send that as an email along with whatever I send out
Thank
tonight.
you.
That could be helpful. Okay, well, I wish you all a sweet Pesach, and see
Same
some of
back
you
to
on
you.
Saturday morning. And no class next Monday, and I think next Wednesday we'll talk about your site. Okay, so
Bye, everybody.
good night.
Bye.
Good
Good
Pesach.
Pesach.